Hello, I'm Dr. James Bogash, expert in health and longevity and creator of Bogash Life and Balance. And today we're going to talk about one of my pet peeves, and that is the total ignoring of natural immunity to COVID and the fact that we're completely ignoring it at least here in the United States. And it really doesn't matter if you've been infected or not. But that completely runs opposite to everything we've always known about human physiology and disease and the research on that. Somewhere when this started, there was this fear, because that's all it was, that, hey, we don't know if you can catch it again. If you get COVID, you might not be protected. But for some reason, we thought COVID was going to be something completely different than any other virus we'd ever encountered in an entire recording of human physiology. Turns out that much of what we were talking about on the front end of COVID does not hold true, and it was a lot of fear-mongering. And this whole issue of immunity, we now need to prove what we already knew, that human physiology is very good at fighting off disease and maintaining an immunity to that. And that's not just about antibodies. So I had COVID in January, my antibodies are still high. That doesn't really mean anything to me other than obviously it's good, but if my antibodies weren't high, it wouldn't make a difference to me. So this was a study out of Ireland. It was a systemic review, so this is peer-reviewed. A lot of people are like, well, it's not peer-reviewed, so it doesn't count. Unless it's peer-reviewed and it's something that supports what I believe, then not being peer-reviewed counts. But this is a peer-reviewed study, systemic review of peer-reviewed studies, looking at 11 studies, almost 616,000 people who had PCR positive or antibody tested. So these aren't people who thought they were sick. These are people that it's documented that they had COVID, or at least exposure to SARS-CoV-2. They found that 0% up to, at the high end, 1.1% reinfection rate. So this isn't looking at blood work. This is looking at real-world examples or real-world existence of durable immunity. And that's not looking at this blood work or that blood work. It's looking at, hey, how many people got reinfected? And that number was incredibly small. In some studies, it was undetectable. Highest level went to 1.1%, which is still, that's really high. And that doesn't even count things you can do to boost your immune system, which is another hot topic with me, is that we're not having any discussions about how to support our own immunity. Then the other thing is 3 of these studies went upwards of 10 months. So even 10 months later, there was the immunity did not drop down. Oh my God. Human immunity is doing what we expect it to do, and it didn't decay with time. The only reason we asked that question is because, well, it happens with vaccines, so maybe it can happen with with natural infection, and turns out it's not happening, there's no decay in that immunity over time. That may or may not change with variants, probably not a whole lot, because the immune system doesn't just look at the spike protein, it looks at they're called epitopes, and it looks at other regions of the virus and memorizes those. The vaccine using the spike protein will only look at the spike protein. So if that changes enough, your body may not recognize it. So I'm not suggesting that we should have COVID parties and get everybody exposed, but for the 100 million plus people who have already been exposed, we need to stop throwing them to the side and acting like they don't count, and they need to do this and get vaccinated and vaccine passports. Otherwise, it doesn't count. And we know, that flies in the face of the research. I can't say that strongly enough. So if you say follow the science, we're not following the science. We're going completely opposite of what we know. And instead of using those resources for people who have documented infection, we should be using those in other places, other areas of the world. We're really highlighting just how selfish the rich nations if this is such a global epidemic, we should be sharing what we have, and that is not happening. As always, I'll post a link to this particular review in the description. Make sure you like this video, share it with somebody who you think needs the information, and subscribe to the channel.